I do believe that Litecoin just had this very unique positioning at that point, as you mentioned, where it became the sort of like the only real alternative on places like Coinbase or whatever, or people using their wallets to move it around and not get killed on transaction fees or whatever. And it stuck for the most part, right? It stuck. And so even though you had the swoon of 2019, 2020, there were still enough people that remembered how that worked and how it worked for them that they were starting to come back in 2021 and onward.
This podcast is sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some random person in a random place. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, you truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you could find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy and sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On their website, you can search by coin, address, if the ATM supports selling as well as buying, and you can also search by geo area, country, state, city. You can also check and compare actual current fees at different ATMs. If you want to find out more, head over to coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com.
All right, so hey everyone, I'm joined by the one and only David Schwartz. How's it going, man?
Good. How about you, man?
I'm doing well, as we kind of talked off air about it. Doing well, but the wellness is tempered with the holy crap, I have so many things I need to do right now. And so it never ends. And I'm sure as someone in your position, you understand whose job is it? It's like, it's my job to do everything, and it never ends. So would you mind just letting everyone know who you are and kind of what you do?
Yep. So my name is David Schwartz, and I'm a board director and director for strategic partnerships at the Litecoin Foundation. It's a nonprofit based mostly out of the United States now through a 501c3. And I just help coordinate strategic partnerships and also navigate through the ecosystem, finding good places for Litecoin to land. And sort of just expand its utility and its volume and on different exchanges and everything else. So,
yeah, sounds like you got a tough job.
Yeah, and coordinate all the Litecoin summits, but that's actually more fun than a lot of the other stuff. So, enjoy that.
I can imagine. Although dealing with event venues and things like that. I've done a little bit of that in a past life here and there. I know my wife does a lot more of that for her job. And so it's a lot. I understand that can be a pain, but so how did you get into crypto to begin with? And then how did that kind of lead you to Litecoin? It's a Batman origin story here.
Yeah, sure. So I first heard about it when I was in the military. This is, early 2011 timeframe, 2012, 2013. And obviously it wasn't in a good light. It was just based off of, a lot of what the news was reporting at the time. When scams would come up or exchanges go down or Silk Road or whatever else. And being in the military, I had a top secret compartmental clearance, and you had to go through a lot to get one of those. And even though I was interested in what it was, I had a lot else going on in my life. Married with 4 kids and doing a lot with the military. So it was a passing thing that I saw, but I saw that it was mostly held in a negative regard. And so I'm like, that's probably not something I need to be dabbling in right now, because, it's just didn't probably look, from a viewing at it from where I was at in my position, it probably wasn't a good thing to get into. So just kind of like forgot about it for a few years. And then in 2016, I was reading about John McAfee going ahead and being a CEO at this small little company. It was a penny stock company, and they were bringing him in, and he was going to turn it into a Bitcoin mining company. And so I was kind of like, well, McAfee antivirus is pretty smart dude, all this other stuff. So I thought I'd buy a little bit of the shares of the stock. But then I started reading a year later in 2017, mid 2017, about what Bitcoin actually was, how it functioned, what was the intent behind it. Now, granted, you got to remember this is still before we want the government and institutions to, be all over this. This is more still the cypherpunk feel and all that stuff. And I thought this is pretty cool. And I thought the stock market was fairly bloated at that time even. So I was like, I want to take some of what I had in shares and put it into Bitcoin. So I bought my first little Bitcoin on Coinbase, and it took me 3 attempts with the bank to even get my Coinbase to link up with my bank, because they were telling me it was fraudulent. They didn't want me to do anything wrong with my money that I would regret. So that just basically emboldened me even more to do it. And
of course.
Yeah. And so then once I bought some Bitcoin, it was just right before Bitcoin Cash got added to Coinbase. So there were still only 3 of them on there. It was Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. I started reading into those as well and understanding how those worked. And I just really started to gravitate towards the 2, Bitcoin and Litecoin, for the most part. And I saw the difference between them. And to me, it felt like they kind of complemented each other. And at the time, Charlie was a very vocal person on Twitter. And he seemed like somebody who was very fair and wanted to make sure that people were understanding what was happening in the market. So sometimes he would destroy some FUD that was out there. Sometimes he was letting people know about certain things. And I appreciated that. And so that sort of gravitated me a little bit more, because obviously people like to identify with certain values and things that they see similar. And so he struck me as the kind of person that had good intentions throughout what he was doing. And I couldn't necessarily do that with Bitcoin, although I do understand and appreciate the mysterious part of Satoshi. At that time, I was still looking for more of an investment that would help grow what I had. And so I invested in the 2 of them. But as that time went by, in late 2017 into early 2018, I really started to understand, after using both of them on wallets. My first was a Keep Key. I bought a Keep Key, and I come to the house and I was using that, and somebody that I knew was in a little bit of a financial bind. So I tried sending them a little bit of each. And there was a stark difference between them. And so that's when it really clicked for me, how Litecoin could be used in the transfer part of it much easier than Bitcoin. And this is 2017, grant you. So,
of course.
Yeah. And the volumes for each weren't anywhere near where they are now, as far as transactional volume per day and all that stuff. And there was a difference then. So then I just started getting a little bit more into Litecoin, and I ended up joining the foundation as a volunteer in February of 2018, and got in there. And I didn't really necessarily know what I was supposed to be doing there, because it was Slack at the time, but their Slack was mostly developers and more technical people, and that's not really where my forte was. I was more of a manager. And coming from the military and working for the state of Wisconsin at the time in HR, I didn't know how I was going to fit in. And then I kept seeing these different coins having conferences, or crypto conferences in general. I thought, maybe there's something I can do there. So I just asked, have you guys ever done a conference? Is there anything are you guys interested in doing anything like that? And they were like, yeah, sure. That sounds like a good idea, actually. Do you want to run it? And I was like, I've never run a conference, but I had put together conferences for, or been a part of conferences where, you have all. So my job at the time was in the military was I worked for the active guard and reserve at the end, right? So I was an active reservist, and the place that I was at was United States European Command. So I was stationed in Stuttgart. And so every year they would have all of 50 of the National Guard generals come from the from the different states, and we'd have this conference, and I would help put some of that together. So I was like, well, sure. I've done, not realizing the difference between a commercial conference, where you're trying to draw people in, and there's a lot different stuff going on than coordinating, 50 generals and their wives, and what is this going to happen? When do we put the plates out? Since, so it was a learning experience, but it went pretty well. So then after it was done, Charlie just asked if I wanted to come on part-time as a sort of like more like a program manager, and just manage part of Discord and keep things moving on different projects. So it started like that. And it just sort of evolved into where it is now. But that's basically my genesis story.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a lot of like early days type people who have a similar sort of story to a certain extent, where people hear about this thing, about the tech. They're like, I don't know, I'll look into it later. Hear a lot of negative stuff, and then at some point you hear enough about it to where it just clicks. Yeah. And then I would say the smart people get into Bitcoin, and then I wouldn't say necessarily get out of Bitcoin, but understand that's the beginning of the rabbit hole, and they don't get stuck there. And 2017 is a fantastic time for that, because personally, I was kind of out of Bitcoin by the end of 2016 because I was exposed to the difference that you saw in a much more raw way earlier on. But 2017 would have been the time when the transaction fee spike and the delays and everything just should have shaken a lot of sovereignty people kind of out of that. So just as a random aside on that, did you ever get sort of tempted to be more into the Bitcoin camp later when Lightning came around?
No, it's kind of interesting you asked that, because when I had a hard time sort of understanding why that was better than if something happened naturally that,
many such
I didn't
cases.
understand, well, why, if it's so great, why does it need a layer 2 to do that, right? If that's what the proclamation of its purpose is, but then you have to have something else added to it in order for that to happen, right? And so I still thought it was an interesting idea, but it took me talking to, Charlie on the side. He's very good with answering questions of, educating people on the space and how different things function. So between him and another guy called eCurrency Hodler, Andrew Yang, those two answered a lot of my questions for Lightning, and it made sense why they would need to do it, but it didn't make sense for me in terms of what I would want to use, because to me, it just seemed like a very hyper complicated way that I could just do the same thing on Litecoin immediately. So it didn't win me over. I thought it was an interesting concept and something that may work and solve that problem for them, but it wasn't something I was interested in.
Yeah. And you may there's bell curve memes as far as the dumb and the smart on the intellect thing. Yeah. It's one of the truer kind of memes out there, I would say. One thing that you mentioned that I think is kind of deceptively astute is the whole why do we need this extra thing if it works so great? And for me, that's sort of been something where with the entire layer 2 scaling debate, where people say, why don't we'll just do all this on the second layer? It's like, well, why can't you do that on the first layer? Well, because of whatever reasons. And it's like, well, then the second layer can't have those same properties. So that kind of basic, there's a little bit of delusion in my personal opinion, right? As far as saying this is a completely separate product and it works completely differently, but it is this thing that it's not. And that's there's a lot of technical arguments, high-level technical arguments that can take you to that conclusion, but just that very simple, why wouldn't I just use Litecoin kind of thing is the actual big brain truth, I would say.
Yeah, and that goes for that's why the big block wars happened too, right? It's there's so many different things that were happening during that time that as a new person, I found it confusing at that time. I can only imagine if someone steps into the crypto space now with the same type of intent that you and I had back then. I don't swear much, but honestly, I would think, what a shit show with all the different things that are out there now, how would somebody who's really genuinely looking for something get past all of the shallow narrative stuff that's out there and have enough time to look through enough quality projects to understand what they really want to get into? It's much harder even now than it was back then. And I found it a bit confusing because I didn't know enough to understand who was just pulling my leg with technical talk and who was actually being genuine with it. So I can only imagine now, with the heightened intensity and the amount of money that's flowing through it versus then, how confusing that could be for somebody that's new.
I would say in a lot of ways it's kind of better. I kind of remember the early days when someone said something and it was just unchecked. And the community, the silos that the different communities are in, which by the way is a very real thing today. I've noticed there's a heightened amount of discourse these last couple months with price action of especially certain assets. And in that, I've seen all kinds of people opening their mouths and displaying their ignorance. And I'm not saying that as a hardcore critique. These are people, everyone knows a lot about their specialized community, but then they just, when you poke your head and look at something else, the knowledge about how that works is just like really not there. And so I kind of feel like there's like the cross, we're even talking about high level technical minds. And one of my, I guess the only name I'll name in the, because it's a maybe more charitable approach to that. There's this guy, Mert, who's a big Solana guy, runs Helios Labs, and he's also a very big Zcash pumper. He's been very adamant about that stuff. And then he started commenting on some Zcash technical things, and I realized this guy's an extremely intelligent guy. He has a high level of knowledge on a lot of things, but he was talking about hybrid systems. I was sort of arguing with him, but trying not to argue, just have a very civil conversation. And it became very clear to me that he had no idea about hybrid proof of work, proof of stake systems, how they work, and more importantly, that they've been in production for like 9+ years now. Like it's very well tested tech. And for him, it seemed like his knowledge it's entirely hypothetical. We don't know how it's going to work. And it's like, this is one of the most like high power brains in the space, and he doesn't know this big thing that he's commenting on. And that kind of, I'm sure, maybe by next week he will. I mean, he's one of those kinds of people that learns fast. So
right. And he's going to dig into it.
Yeah, it's one of those things you hear constantly with people saying like, and I'm sure you've seen like the not a privacy coin thing. How much have you seen that running around?
Quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. It's a slippery slope. Like, it's very interesting. I sort of equate it to like, I don't know how many people are into sports that watch the thing, but let's take baseball. When you have home field advantage, there's a reason it's home field advantage. It's just not the crowd. It's the way the stadium is built out. All the little nooks and crannies, how the field works, the grass. Like when a ball hits the grass in different grasses, it's either rolls faster or slower. Or there's all kinds of stuff that happens that the nuances that our average fan may or may not realize go into home field advantage. And I think many times we have a lot of people in the space that are like players that are going into a stadium for the first time and think it's going to be just like when they play at their field, and it's not, right? And until they get to play on those other fields for a while and learn the nooks and crannies and the nuances of the field and everything else, then they'll understand more about playing on that field. And I think many times, because we have silos in our space, you have a lot of people who know their field very well, or perhaps think they know their field very well, and then feel they can venture out into other fields and tell people why that field is inferior to theirs, right? Or just not know how to play games. Yes, a lot of away games, and they don't understand it. And so I've tried to be very careful when I even mention another coin in any capacity, only because I think early on I did fall into that trap when I would have arguments with people from because I fell into all of that stuff early on. Like I had arguments, just blind arguments with people and other coins and projects at the beginning, because that's kind of how Twitter was at that time even, right? So it almost became like some stupid badge of honor if they ended up blocking you or doing something else, because you felt like you said something right, when in reality you're probably just annoying, right? And or they just couldn't talk to you because you wouldn't allow any other information to come in other than what was coming out of your mouth. And so obviously learned from that. And so over the years, even like if there's something where I have a fairly good idea of how it functions and what I think is the premise behind it, I'll still be fairly careful on how I engage about it, if I do at all, right? Because maybe it just doesn't make any sense or doesn't help anything to even do that.
Yeah, my kind of killer tip on that for those listening is if you find yourself in an online argument, do it in a Socratic way, where you instead of like say something to counter them, ask them a kind of messed up question a little bit, and it will either, annoy them and prove your point, or if you're wrong, it will allow you to learn something new, but have that save where you didn't say something wrong just then.
Right.
It's kind of it's a trick, It's
a move. And you have to read the room too, right? Like, I mean, if you look at standard arguments, for the most part, psychologically, there's always a posturing that happens at the beginning. So whatever it is that you normally have as canned responses or canned, reasoning for why this or that, those all come out at the beginning. That's all the posturing and everything else that happens. And after you get through that, you can start actually disseminating through the conversation and start picking out areas where it's like you're either confused or you think maybe they have a point or, whatever else. And then that's when you get into what you're talking about, where, okay, I say something, and then you're able to then ask a question that either helps me elaborate and show you that I know what I'm talking about, or that I don't know what I'm talking about, if something is valid, or perhaps maybe it's not valid. And so I think you're right. It takes a little while, though. It definitely doesn't happen at the beginning of one of those conversations. It usually takes a little bit.
It depends on who you're doing it with. But
yeah.
So what I've noticed with, Litecoin's had an interesting history that like people who haven't been paying attention haven't really seen. I would kind of characterize there's a few little like eras and life cycles. Like there was the early era of just, pure, like have fun, pure, this is an altcoin kind of thing. This is an alternative Bitcoin. We're trying it out. And then there was like big development dips as far as from like the 2011 to like 2017 era. In there was a lot of that stuff. I don't remember exactly which year it was kind of like less active, but somewhere in there. And then there's a 2017 to, I don't know, whatever, which I would call the like the testnet era, where it was like the testnet for Bitcoin was kind of like the slur, but also kind of like the value proposition at the same time. And then there is sort of like the beginning of adoption era that I would say we're kind of still sort of in. And then like the privacy coin era. So like it's kind of had an interesting life cycle. So do you remember the kind of the end of the testnet era, when it wasn't, we're going to add SegWit before Bitcoin and show them it works. We're going to add Lightning that no one's going to use. And then Bitcoin's going to also have no one use it. And then to kind of breaking out into, we're not just second fiddle, we're going to do our own thing.
Yeah, I feel like, I could be wrong, but I kind of feel like the 2021 period is probably when it was coming to the end of that testnet psychology. Like, this is what it is, or at least part of its identity, right? I think some of that was actually brought on perhaps even by Bitcoiners, not necessarily Litecoiners, because
being too mean.
Well, it was more like, your purpose for existing is done now, so now you're irrelevant. And some of that shows, if you go back and look at, data or price movement or whatever, there's obviously to me, there's a strong divergence somewhere in that time period, especially like 2019. But obviously some of that, you're at the pits, the bottom part of a bear market, right? And it shows in activity, it shows in price, it shows in a lot of things. And I think that was the turning point, the start of it, where if this thing is going to last, it's going to have to create its own identity that's not tied to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that's 2019 is the time period where Charlie's bringing up the idea of, hey, maybe we should start thinking about MWEB. So, or some sort of form of fungibility tied to Litecoin that, you know, it helps it be the kind of money it's supposed to be. If it's going to be money, it needs to have this feature. And
Yeah,
that's, I think that's where it kind of turns.
Did he bring it up first as it was going to be Mimblewimble kind of thing, or was it just kind of generally more conceptually, we need something, and then that came out later? Like, was this kind of his baby?
Yes. Yeah, he brought it up on, I think at that, I can't remember if we were still on Slack or if it was Discord, but he brought it up in that group. And it was interesting hearing all the arguments for and against it. And it helped me understand a lot more, because remember at that point, I'm probably a year and a half into being a part of this foundation, and I'm still learning a lot of the intricacies of crypto at the time. And so to hear the argument for and against, most of the for was technically based. Obviously some idealism in there, but mostly from a technical standpoint. And the against was mostly like out of fear of being cut off from exchanges and things like that, right? Like regulatory environment type stuff. Or no existence of regulation at that point, but where would it go in the future, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of I can definitely relate to that, because late last, I think it was earlier this year actually, I got a DAO proposal through the Dash network about doing an overhaul of privacy as well, and it was like roughly 75% for, 25% against. So it was like a strong yes, but not like super overwhelming. And a lot of it was PTSD from the delisting era of like the evil P word that people didn't like. And it was a lot of like, is this going to screw us more? This is, I'm sure that there was cases like that sort of mentioned in the Litecoin community about like, look what happened to Dash over there.
I would, yes. You know, obviously Dash came up and Monero, obviously, because I think most people at that point, even though Zcash existed, Monero was considered the privacy coin for the most part within most circles. And so I would say the percentage of for versus against was probably around that same percentage, 75, 80% for, 20% against. And I think mostly it came down to, well, what are we even doing here if we're going to be worried about what governments do when this is something that's governmentless to begin with? And if you know, that whole logic that goes with it. And so that's kind of how that came to be. And then the next phase to that was to sort of present it to the community and then do like a tour. Charlie went around to, you know, different mining pools and whoever else that, you know, obviously getting them to understand what this would mean, how would it affect Litecoin, and then also talking to exchanges before any of that to find out, well, what is your thought process in this? If Litecoin were to go ahead and do this, what would be the order of effect that happens through you guys? Like, are you looking to delist it? Are you waiting till someone tells you to delist it? Like, is this, you know, what are the factors that go into it? And basically, it came down to, well, if we're receiving Litecoin on a normal address and we're sending it out to a normal address, we don't necessarily see what the issue is, right? And that's the way it is today still, is if you try and send Litecoin through an MWEB address to an exchange, they're not going to accept it, right? And they won't send it out to an MWEB address either. But it exists on all those exchanges. The only exchanges where it actually got delisted was Korea. And there's a lot behind that that's very interesting. But that was the only thing that it seemed like news sources wanted to pick up on, was that I got delisted in Korea. out of those 5
Yeah.
exchanges. Right.
To be fair, I barely saw any headlines about that. Like it was,
Right.
you'd have to dig in to find that even
You would.
happened.
You would. But every place else around the world that Litecoin was already on, nobody did anything about it. And to this day, they still all function the same. So I think that helped actually prove a number of things. Financially, exchanges are always looking, and Litecoin had fairly good volume in 2022 when it came out in February of 2022. But Litecoin was showing that it had good volume trading wise on a lot of these exchanges. So the last thing they were trying to do was, cut off their nose to spite their face kind of thing, and delist it simply because there may or may not be something that comes down the pipe from the government later. So they just let it ride. And I think that was a smart move from them, because they shouldn't be in the business. To me, they should not be in the business of determining what is listed just based off of privacy or not. Like, their business is to allow places for coins and tokens to be exchanged, bought, and sold. And that's it, right? To me, that's, now granted, I'm not an exchange. I've never been a part of an exchange. I don't know the intricacies that go into that and all the, nuances and whatever else. But just from, a general 30,000 foot view, to me, what's the point of an exchange, and where does the disseminate, or the deciding factor of what gets listed or not end? And if it's something where it's like, okay, well, it's showing promise on these other exchanges, it has a good sustained amount of trading, volume going on, sure, we'll go ahead and list it too, which is the normal ugly catch-22 is, well, show us your volume. I can't show you the volume because none of you guys are listing it, right? So it's like this thing where, anyway, but if for them, if you're there strictly to create this type of environment and you make money off of it, even with Monero, I would think there's a lot of people who obviously are diehards on Monero, and it seems to be doing perfectly fine without all of these exchanges being involved. As an exchange, why wouldn't you want to have that on your exchange? So
of course, especially if no one else has it. And I kind of feel like that's the Kraken advantage.
Yeah.
Kraken has been one of the only big ones that has just been like, there's been others, like Mexi and things like that. But Kraken is the big one that has just kept it listed in the jurisdictions where it could. And I'm sure they have a ton of volume from that. So it's kind of interesting, where I would say it's kind of, it's hard to like encapsulate these things like definitively, but it does kind of feel like Litecoin and Monero are kind of the opposite ends of the trendsetters of the privacy space, in that Monero, it pushes the limits as far as let's just see what's the worst that could happen here, and then Monero gets it, and then how do they do? Doing all right, this is fine. And then Litecoin is like, how mainstream can you be while still having a pretty, I would say, a relatively advanced privacy function? And so, like, based on like the way those two things work, everyone else can kind of, obviously the picture is much more complicated than that, such as Firo coming out with the exchange-only addresses for Europe, or starting to, and then in parallel development for Zcash, and that paves the way for other things. There's also a big, a lot of the stable coins that are moving to like a confidential transactions kind of model is also like, okay, this is the most mainstream you can get. This is kind of like the baseline. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that, but definitely, so as far as the delisting kind of stuff just hasn't really materialized for the most part. What about the positive effects from like, I guess, reputation, from like user interest, all the other stuff? What's that kind of been like in the MWEB era?
Yeah, so I think for probably the first 2 years that MWEB was alive, as a functioning extension block of the base chain, right? So there wasn't much push for it at all from anywhere. And I don't think that's terrible. A lot of people will tell you, well, you guys didn't market it very well from the beginning. But you also have to remember a lot of things can happen within the early part of something being implemented. Just because maybe nothing happens at the beginning, oh, great, it launched, there's no issues, whatever else. There's always, like, if you were to have a heavy influx of anything at the beginning, you're affecting more people than if you were to do it sort of, I don't know if smartly is the right way to put it, but like incrementally, to where you have, X amount of people using it first, you get to experience what that looks like. Then you add, then you start adding a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And then you can start seeing where maybe there's some cracks in it or whatever else. Maybe there's some glitches. The coder's got to go in and fix something or whatever. It doesn't affect as many people. I think that's a smarter way of doing things. And so for the first couple of years, there just really wasn't much of a push to get people to go on to MWEB. And you can see that in the numbers. If you go to mwebexplorer.com, you can check out the volumes there of everything. And in 2024, we started to actually we should really start pushing people moving some of their coins onto MWEB so that they can start using it. And so the first wallet to actually take a step forward and say, we'll help you with that, was Cake Wallet. So Vic and his team did that. And you could literally watch from the point when they made it live on Cake Wallet and prior. There's a jump, like it basically doubled in the amount of coins that went on to MWEB from there. And then from there, we created a new wallet called Nexus Wallet, Litecoin native wallet, and it has MWEB capabilities on there. So then you saw another spike, right, from the amount of users putting Litecoin onto MWEB, and then Stack Wallet was the next one. And so we've been working with other wallets to add it to theirs. Some of them want to see more volume first, right? Yeah. But others are like, we want to understand the technicals behind this, and how does that, like, one of the bigger questions was like, well, can somebody swap from let's say Ethereum into Litecoin that's on an MWEB address? And that's not technically doable for the most part yet, right? And so that stops some of them because they make their money off swaps and whatever else. So, well, we'll just stick with Litecoin for now. But as the popularity of it grows, then the hope is that, well, they would want to have it just natively on there, because a lot of people just want to store their Litecoin on MWEB in that wallet, right? And so you have the effort from the foundation to connect with certain wallets to try and push that. You have the community members that are doing it as well, asking their favorite wallets to add it. And then you also have other people, like there's a guy named Hector Chu, who has decided to try and figure out, well, how can I benignly add it to like a ledger or a Trezor or whatever, and has experimented with doing that and found ways to maybe be able to sort of like sidestep the actual wallet itself and have a way to do it. Now, those aren't provably the best route to go yet, but I mean, the fact that there's, these different avenues of attack to try and get it added to wallets is good. So we anticipate there should be some more wallets, obviously adding it within the next 6 to 12 months, which then you would still see those bumps in the amount of coins that are added to MWEB addresses. I think we're just below 300,000 coins now, which if you take over the entire, 77 million or whatever coins that have been mined to this point, 300,000 isn't a lot. But you have to understand that at this time last year, you weren't even at, like, I don't think you were even at 100,000 Litecoin in MWEB. So it's 3x'd at a minimum from where it was just even a year or so ago, which means there's a desire and a demand for it, and that's good. So that's what we keep focusing on. And, further down the line, let's say 2030, you're looking at probably a couple million at least, right? And that's good. And that's when you start seeing people utilize it within the MWEB addresses, which then obfuscates it and becomes harder to actually track the coins and where they came from and where they're going. So,
yeah, it makes sense. Have you noticed a, I guess, reputational change or a market positioning kind of change where Litecoin was kind of more, digital gold light, like digital silver, or just like the payment coin, to where now there's like a darker, dangerous cypherpunk element, or like those people come in, or things, have you noticed like a morphing, or has it kind of just been still Litecoin kind of?
No, I think it's still Litecoin. I think people are appreciating and embracing the added feature, but they're not identifying it as we're solely a privacy coin and we do, whatever. It's more like this is it's like, okay, imagine a solar system where privacy is the sun. And then you have different planets that are obviously more gravitated towards it than others. So you have, your Mercury is probably like your Monero, and somebody like a Litecoin is more out on the fringe of the solar system, like a Saturn or a Neptune or something. Like it still exists within the solar system, but it's not as close to the sun as those others. And so I think most Litecoin users see it that way too. It's this great added feature that allows it to have more fungibility, and it's a great tool to have in the toolbox, but it's not the toolbox.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I kind of have this like idea I've had for the last couple of years about that of MVP, or minimum viable privacy, that is kind of a requirement that anything that's going to be used at scale will just need to have. And so I kind of was talking about that for like a next cycle thing, like the 2028, 2029 type cycle. But a lot of this last month is almost like, I don't know if it's like proved me right or wrong or whatever, but it's kind of seems like anything that has anything related to that P word seems to be doing really well. Like obviously we got Dash to a Well, Zcash is like the massive rocket. I kind of feel like maybe Monero will happen, or maybe it already happened because of just been doing well for a while.
Yeah. Decred, I would think the same thing. Decred's seen a bump lately too, I think.
Yeah, they added a integrated coin join feature to the protocol not too long ago, and so you got that. And then you got I can't even think of all the ones, but there's like obviously Pivx, Firo, those jumping on board. Even like Z Classic, like the super no one cares about Zcash fork from all back then. And it is getting funny to where you're seeing people like, say, from the Bitcoin Cash community saying, well, we have privacy too because of this Cash Fusion thing, which is not built into the protocol. It's an add-on to separate. But then the funniest thing was when I saw some Bitcoin SV people saying, actually, BSV is a privacy coin too, because look at the white paper, it says the word privacy. So we're starting to get that grasping at straws. I did not expect privacy to get hot like this cycle. I thought it would start to like pick up next cycle. You kind of have the same idea, or?
I did. I didn't think it was its time yet. I still look at like where Litecoin is within that privacy realm as like proof of concept for Litecoin. Right? I don't. It's not to the point where it's like you got people funneling in to use it. It's more of it's this added feature that people are curious about still, right? That's the stage we're at. But I don't think it's grasping at straws to say that there is a level of privacy within Litecoin because of it. So we're sort of also in between the people grasping at straws and the people that live in privacy, right? We're somewhere in between that.
Yeah, of course.
Where would I think it should be? It's probably, it starts leaning more towards the gravitational pull of privacy because it is important. But I don't think it'll ever be like the primary reason for why people get into Litecoin. I think the primary reason will still be there is an element of store of value to it, and you can definitely use it for payments and peer-to-peer transactions. And they're flawless and they're cheap, and that's attractive by itself. But then if you got people who want to do that with an element of privacy to that, I think that's where you have people that will be using the Mimblewimble extension blocks for that, the MWEB. So.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the kind of, I don't know if it's the chicken in the room or whatever, the elephant in the room. For some people, it's definitely not a mystery to the Litecoiners, is like the usage as money and the growth of usage as money. So first of all, that was Bitcoin. And then 2017 is kind of like that's the end of the road for that. And it's just been sort of tapering since then. Lightning never really made an impact. It's there. Not everyone uses it. Few people use it. It's still kicking. It just didn't work out. And it's now like the Bitcoin community is debating, what kinds of, graphic images can you allegedly store on the chain. And it's a disaster, right? In the aftermath of 2017, we saw a lot of cryptocurrencies come around seeking to sort of fill the void a little bit, whether it's, the Bitcoin Cash of the world. Dash has been there for a while. Litecoin's been there. Some people moved to Dogecoin for a while, and then, just so many options. And nothing really worked out short term. Like nothing really caught on. Like almost everything I mentioned has gained transaction volume over the years. But nothing, I would say in the early days, but even including Litecoin, didn't really catch on. And then at some point, the only things that have caught on for payments at a appreciable scale have been stablecoins and Litecoin. And stablecoins is kind of obvious and also regrettable, in my opinion. But again, I mean, there might be trade secrets you don't have to talk about, but what's Litecoin's secret sauce of becoming so popular for payments? Because you can't just say, well, it's because it's reliable and cheap, because that's a lot of the options, including, can't just say it was front and center because Bitcoin Cash was like on everyone had it. It was on all the major processors, exchanges like BitPay, all that kind of stuff. And it just really did not catch on despite the community talking about it a whole lot and pushing it. So what would you consider to be Litecoin's secret sauce that is publicly disclosable?
I would think some of that obviously is altcoin first mover advantage. Being created in 2011, it had a positive reception. There was a lot of goodwill cultivated for multiple years. Those are all things I think nobody else can really duplicate at this point or replicate. And so you saw, like, I think the first time where you saw an obvious statement of why Litecoin was during that very heavy push of dollar value in December of 2017, January 18.
Yeah.
If you go back and look, that's when, as you mentioned, Bitcoin was having a very heavy amount of transactions going through, and people started looking for alternatives to move it out into cash or whatever else. And so you had a lot of people choose to use Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin for that specific purpose.
So if I could interject on that bit a bit, I do remember that very vividly. I think Dash was added to Coinbase 2018, 2019, much later. So it wasn't an option. Bitcoin Cash was just like coming around, and there was glitches as far as like people, the integrations and stuff might not have been taught. People were sending coins to the wrong Bitcoin address and you know all that. So maybe it could be fair to say that Litecoin was uniquely positioned to be on the biggest exchanges as a cheap alternative that was seen as just reliable.
That would be accurate. And I do agree that there were some arguments against Bitcoin Cash because of those little trip ups and things that happened. Plus, think about it, when Bitcoiners would get that 1-for-1, they would get one Bitcoin Cash for every one Bitcoin. Like that price on Coinbase at that time, it went up to $5,000 something, I think. A lot of people unloaded their Bitcoin Cash at that point, or they held on to it and they've either lost the keys or whatever else. There's all kinds of different things that could have happened by then. But I do believe that Litecoin just had this very unique positioning at that point, as you mentioned, where it became the sort of like the only real alternative on places like Coinbase or whatever, or people using their wallets to move it around and not get killed on transaction fees or whatever. And it stuck for the most part, right? It stuck. And so even though you had the swoon of 2019, 2020, there were still enough people that remembered how that worked and how it worked for them that they were starting to come back in 2021 and onward. And I think one of the main things that helped also was, for the longest time, Charlie was pushing certain projects or companies within the space that were Bitcoin only to be like, hey, at some point, maybe you want to consider adding Litecoin or whatever, right? And for the most part, through all those years, they were Bitcoin only. And they were like, nah, we're not going to do that. But any smart business over time realizes in order to continue to increase profitability and revenue and whatever else, you do have to start expanding on your selections for people, because we're not a one option world. That's just not how we're built, right? So they started adding Ethereum because it wasn't necessarily a direct competitor with what Bitcoin was at that time, right? So you started seeing Ethereum get added to some things like BitPay, right? I remember distinctly, Charlie had asked me to talk to a few pay processors and wallets and whatever to get Litecoin added on during that time frame in 21. So like we got it added on to blockchain.com during that time, which was at that, it was still for a long time, it was like a very pro Bitcoin type.
It was
place.
my first Bitcoin wallet as well in 2013.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And BitPay was another one. And to that point, they hadn't necessarily really shown any interest in adding Litecoin because it was just Bitcoin and Ethereum at that point. They added Dogecoin earlier in 2021. And I remember when they added it, and there was this big to-do about it, and it did fairly well for a couple months when it first came on. And I was at the Bitcoin conference in Miami. And I don't know if you were there or not. I'm assuming you might have been. But Bitcoin 2021 conference was in Miami in basically like this factory warehouse type setting. Very big. But it only had, like, one of the funniest stories is it only had one male bathroom. It's the only place in history where I've ever seen a line going out of the male bathroom for people waiting, and the female one, you could just walk right in, right?
Was there just one female bathroom?
Yeah.
Okay, so it just
there's one of each bathroom. Yeah.
It was a chicken fest, let's just say.
It was crazy, and so, but at that conference, BitPay was there, and there's people within the Bitcoin community that still understand and regard Charlie and respect him for all the things that he's done for Bitcoin and for crypto in general. And one of those was a guy named Sunny Singh. He's gone on to Beluga and done some other things, but he was always an advocate for Charlie and Litecoin and stuff. And he was at BitPay at the time. But there were a few others that were still lingering from the old BitPay, which was Bitcoin only, and they weren't going to have anything to do with Litecoin, but they had just added Dogecoin a couple months prior. And I saw the guy that was the head of marketing there. His name's Bill Zielke. I don't know if he's still there or not, but we had a conversation at the Bitcoin conference. And I mentioned to him, I said, look, I know we've been bugging you for a while, but I got to tell you, you guys added Dogecoin. You obviously saw that there was a demand for it. We should really talk about adding Litecoin, because I think you'd be surprised. And I told him this, I said, I can tell you within 6 months, we'll be number 2 on your list. And I wouldn't be surprised. This is a little cocky, but I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if we became number 1 and overtook Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and he was
that's like opening a leveraged long and having it actually play out.
And
like,
it actually played out.
A little smack talk, but then you're like, oh, wow, I didn't think I was going to win this one.
Right. But they had just tasted what it was like to have an excited group outside of Bitcoin to start using their service. And so he was like, well, we did have a very good, response from the Dogecoin community. So we'll talk about it, and we'll look at adding Litecoin. And they did. And I think it was July of 21. And immediately you saw people using Litecoin. And so within a certain amount of time, it went up to number 3, then number 2. And then somewhere in, I think, 2023, it actually overtook Bitcoin as the top payment option. And for the most part, it's been at number 1 ever since then.
I've seen the dance. I've been watching it. And it's kind of been like a decent lead, but then dipped, and then decent. It's never been overwhelming, but it's like it's always been significant. Sort of like I have kind of two minds about that. Or one, I think it's great to see not Bitcoin and not a stable coin as number 1 somewhere. And in that case, I'm kind of happy. On the other side, like I am every single time I've ever used BitPay personally, I have regretted the experience tremendously. I just used at I think it was this year at a blockchain futurist in Toronto. I bought one of those little seed word etching devices,
Yeah.
and they had never taken any crypto payments that during that conference. I was like, this is kind of embarrassing. Let me help you out. And I was like, all right, what do you got? Oh, sorry, we got BitPay. And then I'm like, all right, well, I do have some Litecoin in my wallet at all times just in case. It's just like my little like sleeve derringer in case my main gun doesn't work kind of thing. So, and I went through the whole experience, and it just was, I'm not going to belabor it too much, but I hope that they managed to make things smooth again, because it was like I had an Edge wallet, which is one of the major wallets, and they didn't have an Edge wallet list. Oh, I'm sorry, it can't work. And I was like, well, I know enough about crypto to know what Edge can do and can't do. So I know that if I say Exodus, Edge will work for whatever you give me that works for Exodus. And so that ended up working, and then, everything worked out in the end.
Yeah.
But it definitely was like me as a pro could figure it out, but the average person, it was just like, man, they need to figure some things out. But again, God bless the people who are paying on BitPay, because apparently there's people, and like just keep doing it. I'm not. That's my opinion. It's a little rough, but like keep doing it. If it's serving you, do it.
I look at it like this: I'm happy that it happened, and I'm happy and I'm happy how it's gone. But I wish there was a better way to understand and relay data for people that use it peer to peer, because ultimately BitPay is still a third party, right? So there's a place for it, but ultimately, I mean, the end goal is to really just be able to send it peer to peer with no third party in between, right? So I would say BitPay, adding it in the middle of 2021 was one of the catalysts, beyond being the OG altcoin that just happened to be in the right place at the right time during the end of the 2017 bull run. That helped too, right? And then I would say the other thing that I think helped a lot was at one point we had a Litecoin debit card. Again, this involves a third party. It involves a third party, but I gotta say, like, I loved my Litecoin debit card. I used it. Oh my gosh, I used it everywhere, and that helped with people spending it for things that they wouldn't have normally had an opportunity to spend it on, right? And you could put it on that card, and it would sit in there as Litecoin, right? And so depending on whatever the price was at the time, if you just held it on your card for a while and maybe the price doubled or whatever, now you had double the purchasing power than you had prior, and then you could spend it. Whereas other cards at the time, I believe, as soon as you put it onto the card, it was converted into dollars and it sat there on the card. So this was very unique.
Yeah. So was that at all, do you know, is it public who the provider for that was?
I think it was, as far as like the processing of the payments.
Yeah, or whoever issued the card or the company. The reason I was curious about that is because this year I've been testing out a Coinbase card, and they do have like a Dash option to load it with Dash. It keeps your balance in that. And so
nice.
It's just because almost no one does that, where they hold the balance in crypto.
Right.
So I was just wondering. I wonder if that's a Coinbase one, but probably not if it went away.
No, I don't think so. I can't remember. I worked with them to have, like, we had a team of people that worked with them to bring this debit card to life. And I can't remember who the infrastructure was in the background that they utilized for the custody and the exchange part of it, right? And the company that provided it to us no longer exists. They went out of business, I think, in 23. I think, if I remember right, they were a victim of the choke point 2.0, just like my company was. So we went out of business, I think, around the same time, actually. And then we haven't had a card since. And so I know people still ask, when are we going to get another Litecoin debit card like that? I don't have an answer for that. And I wouldn't want to have one that has you convert it into a stable coin right away or into dollars. It should sit as
Yeah, I mean that
You
makes
know,
sense. That's kind of what you want is something like real like that. So, have you ever like I'll just show like the everyone's seen like the Coinbase ones, right?
yeah.
And this one, I mean, it's like kind of Litecoin blue,
Hmm.
and doesn't can't you use it for Litecoin? You should be able to.
You should be able to, yeah. Yeah.
So, is there any reason why Litecoin needs its own card more than this already exists?
No, I think it was really more of a this is ours kind of feel to it. You know what I mean?
The branding thing.
Yeah, it's a branding thing.
Yeah, like Tangem, the hardware wallet that's an
Yeah,
NFC thing. I'm a big fan of that experience, and they keep on trying to pitch me for like, oh, do you want like a Dash branded one? And they like it. Our communities love it. I'm like, I understand they love it, but
yeah.
I
There's a
don't want.
cost to it.
I don't. But not just that. I don't want to run around with this card in my wallet that says money on it. It's like, oh, that's where he keeps it. I like to be with black nondescript. That could be anything. It could be a key
That's
fob to
fair.
get into a thing. And so for that, I mean, but as far as a payment card, where you're always taking it out anyway, and it's
Sure.
clearly a payment card. I understand a cool branding. There is a defunct Dash card that was issued by Ionia, which got out of the crypto space, also a choke point type thing,
Mhm.
from my understanding at least. I'm not privy to the details, but they it was kind of a non card, so I still have one. It's like all black and just says on it Dash user, and so it's
Mm.
like the name's user Dash user
Do you ever have
type of thing.
anybody ask you what it meant, like when you pulled the card out? Because that was the part that I think was a draw too. Was if you pulled out a Litecoin debit card and it said Litecoin on it, it had the logo, and you're putting it in there to pay. You know, those
Mm.
cashiers are looking at the card, right? And we would have people ask you, "What does that mean exactly? What is Litecoin?" And then that's when you get to evangelize to them, right? So
Yeah, if this one never got to the stage where it was super descript, I think that in the future it would have been like blue with some cool branding and stuff, and it just never got to that stage. But hopefully one day. I mean, it's always again privacy, especially, it's an interesting concept because humans have an inherent desire to have the worst OPSEC possible. Like that's just we're always trying to do that as social creatures, but then you end up getting your fingers cut off. Like, so how do you balance that? So like for me, I just I probably tell too many people I work in crypto, but I try to keep a low profile. Like a
yeah,
not a I'm hiding low profile, but just maybe I'll have a shirt like this. Like if someone sees, and shout out to 84 million for both of these by the way, but if someone goes out in public and sees this and is like, I get it. That's not just he's not Polish. That's not what this
right,
is. Like if someone gets it, then they deserve to know. But I'm not
yeah,
saying like, Bitcoin, whatever, or like a Solana shirt. I wouldn't be caught dead in one of those probably. But like I did get recognized in an Ethereum shirt from the ETHDAM conference in Amsterdam, which is the best conference in crypto, honestly, one of the best. I mean, no disrespect, I should say. But
ah,
like, so at least that logo kind of gets it. But I definitely think if anyone sees a Litecoin logo and it's just
mm,
like that doesn't say Litecoin, just like the L or something,
yeah,
and that's one of our people. That's like even if you're not a Litecoiner, that's just like, oh,
yeah.
that's the knows game, right? Knows ball.
Funny story. We were in Montana, some
Hmm.
just remote area where you could go down and look at some lakes and in a valley and stuff like. I think it was Montana. Anyway, no, it was actually Mammoth Lakes area in California. Sorry, and we had gone down into this area where there was a lake, and we were walking back to our vehicle, and all I had was a T-shirt that had the L on there, right, a
Hmm.
Litecoin logo, and this mid-50s uh, lady from India just walked up and was like, "Oh, you know Litecoin?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know Litecoin." I'm like, "You know Litecoin?" She goes, "Yeah, I invest in it." I was like, "This is the most like random conversation I could possibly have in the middle of this area." And this woman who, from a demographically speaking, most people think crypto is the thing for younger people who are Zoomers and whatever else, not boomers. And at least at this time period where I experienced this, it was very refreshing. And so I that's the kind of person then I could talk more about. Like you said, I'm not going to go with a megaphone and be telling everybody, hey, I'm into crypto and ask me questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing that. But if someone's able to recognize what I'm wearing, or like, sometimes it just comes up in conversations about finances or whatever, generally, not like, hey, what do you do? How much do you, I'm talking more like the macroeconomic stuff. And then they'll just throw in Bitcoin or something. And I'll be like, what do you know about Bitcoin? And then I can feel from there whether or not it's somebody I can have a deeper discussion with. But yeah, I'm not going around trying to evangelize the world with everything. So
yeah, it is kind of interesting how some people do that, and some people do it very successfully. And I've never been that guy. I've always been, you bring it up, I'll tell you, behind the scenes, very, not super. It's kind of funny, but like my antisocial tendencies considered how much of my week is spent by talking to the live streamed public. What great life's ironies. As far as like Charlie, so Charlie's been an interesting figure in crypto, and I don't really know him super well. I've had some friction with him in the past. I do know something. So I don't think anyone in crypto really would say, you know what this guy was the best at? Like coming up with the most innovative new tech. That's not necessarily what people would appreciate him for. I do think he's probably one of the business development greats in the space that people don't really say it. Like they don't know it. They don't think it maybe. What has it been like having the sort of superpower of super connected Charlie kind of running around and making sure all the wheels are greased behind the scenes and like making these partnerships kind of happen? So you kind of like the, sort of being able to afford almost like a shoestring budget for ops and stuff, because you have like this one guy showing up not out of nowhere, but showing up and asking for 100 million and getting it, kind of like with this latest DAT type thing.
Yeah, those treasuries. That's interesting. So I think I'll probably do it more from a relational standpoint. Because I probably can't speak. I could probably speak a little bit beyond that, but really for me, it's more the experiences I've had directly with him over the years and how that's progressed. So for me, and I know Charlie's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's absolutely normal, right? Not everybody's cup of tea. That if everybody likes you, somebody's lying, right? So
yeah,
I think for me, it started out as I was the student, he was the teacher. And so if I had questions about anything that was related to crypto, technical wise, because I was still trying to understand and figure it out, he would provide answers for me. Never once did he say, I don't have the time for this or anything. And if I needed more explanation, he would give it to me. I think he is also a very private and careful person, just because of the nature of how this whole ecosystem has grown over time. And so like even early on when we would have conversations, he would have me prove who I am before we would even, go on beyond stuff, right? Like when we're talking about things, because he just felt like he needed to, right? And so that was where I started learning more about, I think he's very naturally a private person. I think he's very naturally a guarded person. He's very naturally an analytical person. And I'm sorry, Charlie, but I mean, I've told him this, but I think naturally sometimes, especially when you see him in some interviews, he can be when he's explaining things or getting into what questions you might have for him, he could be a tad boring, right? He just doesn't come across as electric. He's not this person who's going to captivate the general public, right? He's just stating, you ask him a question, he's answering the question, right? And he's answering the question the way Charlie would answer the question, not the way Charlie thinks everybody would want Charlie to answer the question. So
which kind of definitely harkens back to the whole FUD of, I don't know, recent weeks or months at this point of, going on, I forget which interview it was, and just saying I would have been better off if I didn't make like.
He was answering the question.
It's so like 80% of me was just like, what low lives to like pounce on this out of context thing, but 20% of me was like, God damn it, Charlie! Like, could you not have done that?
But that's him. Like he doesn't see the point in window dressing that, right? And the full context of that interview, if obviously you did, but and a lot of other people did. If you watch the entire thing, you understand where that little snippet came from. It was a much bigger question that, unfortunately, is a lot of Bitcoiners took and ran with it as, look at Charlie, he regrets even having. So now, of course, there's the Charlie sold the top stuff, and then there's also Charlie regrets even making you, and all this other. So now we have to deal with.
You should have never been born.
Oh my gosh, it's terrible.
There should be more memes about. I understand it's not helpful to anything, but there should be more memes about him being like a regretful parent or something. And I'd be happy to make them if you want. But like the problem is I don't want them. I don't want them externally circulated. Like internally is fine, but like.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so anyway, on the business development side of it, like he understood where some of these things were going to go very early on, and he invested in a lot of companies that were, catering to the services that we have now, right? Like, God, there's so many of them. But beyond that, even like he helped people within the space that everybody knows. At one point or another, he actually helped them personally. Right. And that always seems to get like buried. One of the stories he had I can't remember if it was the last summit. I think it was the last summit here in May, where he talked about how there was a point where when Vitalik was in charge of Bitcoin Magazine and they weren't doing well financially, and he needed to basically get out of that scenario. Charlie helped him not get basically steamrolled by a bunch of people who were going to take advantage of him when buying it. And so he was able to get him out of there pretty much free and clear. And the other people still, although not completely happy, did have their magazine now that they wanted. And you don't hear a peep out of things like, there's a lot of stories like that you just won't hear because it doesn't help whatever narrative it is that they're trying to spread about Charlie. So I'm not saying Charlie never made anybody upset, because I'm sure he has. But there are a lot of good things. Where he's built a lot of bridges over time that he's able to reach over and talk to those people. If I feel like I'm running into a roadblock on the partnership side on something, I'll be like, hey, Charlie, I've been trying X, Y, and Z. It's not necessarily working. Is there anybody that that might be able to help clear that roadblock out of the way so we can keep moving forward on this? And that's where he's able to do those things. So I think that kind of answers your question. He's deep enough in the space, and enough people have known him over, obviously a decade at least, to where, he's able to reach out and help make some things happen that maybe we would have had a harder time doing if he wasn't involved. Yeah,
I guess if I could classify that, and of course I'm kind of like, I'm always trying to absorb information I see out there, and then this directly affects kind of what I do. I'm trying to learn, I do remember there was one point in particular that it sort of clicked to me that there was like a lot going on behind the scenes. He kind of let peek behind the curtain when he mentioned something on X, I think, about like Litecoin is on every exchange where Bitcoin is. And I'm like, oh, I see it now. Like he saw long term that Bitcoin would crap out and not be good for whatever. And it just like, to use a funny metaphor, maybe unfairly, but it's just like that friend zone dude is hanging out waiting for their relationship to blow up. To be like, oh, I'm right there.
But he's got his arm around her like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
But making sure he's always right there, that proximity. And that was a deeply strategic decision, clearly. It wasn't just, I want it to be everywhere. It's like, well, I specifically want that access everywhere, so it's set up. And then obviously getting on Coinbase really early, like trying to get that solidified ahead of time, like these other kind of things, seems to be, I've noticed the relationship and the strategic planning as well. But something else that I think might be a fun segue into the El Salvador, et cetera drama, which one of the things I would say, because you mentioned Charlie's helped so many people, it does also seem like some of that help, some of that goodwill was wasted on the ungrateful, and the ungrateful being Bitcoin maximalists. And then that takes us to El Salvador. So first of all, was that you writing those posts from the Litecoin account that were upset at people, or was that someone else?
So the handle is a group of people. I just want to make that clear. There's not an individual who provides all the content and puts out the stuff and whatever. But I would say, yes, that was me to put those out, because I specifically had firsthand knowledge of all of that. So it would make sense that would not be a random intern person who could divulge that type of information. So that it's the first time, yes, I'm admitting to the fact that for that specific scenario, that was me writing those things. And and I know it made quite an impact, I believe even on you at the time, and I'm very appreciative of that. And I think it needed to be done, because for multiple reasons. So a lot of the community and the vibe in the community did tend to follow the personality and characteristics of Charlie in many ways. Like, we got stepped on a lot. There wasn't a lot of pushback necessarily, because that's just how Charlie is too. Like, he takes a lot of crap and he just doesn't say anything back, right? And sometimes I think that's good, obviously, to be able to have the strength to withhold lowering yourself to maybe some other people's levels or whatever. But I do believe there is a place and time sometimes to be able to unleash some truth and hit back also when needed. And I think that was one of those times, because for the longest time, having been in that position of strategic partnerships already, there were multiple times where deals got killed because maxis killed it in the background. And so this is not like a one-off thing, right? When we talk about El Salvador. And at some point you get frustrated, because when you start seeing someone of Jack Maller's nature going out there and literally pleading for people to understand how they're being undercut by XRP at the political level, right?
Yeah.
When those are the individuals that literally make sure that only Bitcoin gets added to this, and only Bitcoin is a part of this, and only Bitcoin, like, if you go and look at the legislation, the bills that have been presented in the majority of the states where they're talking about Bitcoin being added as a reserve, as a proposition, right? Those bills were the people helping to write those bills were Bitcoin only people. Those are the lobbyists, the people that were tied to that. So when you see, the only assets that can be added as a strategic reserve for the state are ones that have at least a 500 billion market cap or more.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm not sure how, it's not firsthand knowledge, but secondhand, because I'm good friends with Representative Keith Ammon in New Hampshire, who got the kind of championed the first ever strategic reserve bill that was passed. And I think he's more of a Bitcoin guy than anything, but he's very much not a maxi and a very much of a good dude. And I think he just, I have some objections to the law because, again, I looked at the criteria. I'm like, let me do the math real quick. Oh, I see what's going on. And, I almost feel like it would be difficult to amend at this point, but I would almost want to amend it. It's like very clear, and you see the, Dennis Porter's been skulking around over here a lot too. And like, you could see it. Like, if anyone who knows anything, they see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know some friends who are tied to specific states, and they're political, they're plugged into it, right? At the political level, the government, the state level for their states. And it's consistent, right? The message is consistent. This was being written or helped to be written by people that were part of the Bitcoin only community. And it becomes very clear when you read it that that's how it's sculpted out. So that it basically builds a large moat around them to be the only asset to be put into these strategic reserves, if at a minimum for a long period of time. Maybe at some point, some other, cryptos are able to achieve 500 billion market cap or more. Obviously, Ethereum would probably be the next potential candidate, if not a few others, right?
Yeah.
But until that happens, it's Bitcoin only, right? And so you have highly successful, long legacy type companies that have been around forever that don't even have a $500 billion market cap.
Yeah, I mean, even like Solana would need like an 8x or something to get there. And like Ethereum's not there currently, so it's only one. And then if we go down to, Litecoin would need 100x to get there. And Litecoin's not like bottom of the pack either. We're talking,
right?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who doesn't see this as like usurious, it's like, as a load of bull kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is just like, I don't know what to tell you. It's wild.
Yeah. And so to go back to the original question, after seeing Mallers with this long video talking about how people need to unite behind Bitcoin because of XRP trying to undercut them in the government, area and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, this is enough. I can't do this anymore. So that's when I spilled the beans on all of that stuff. And I did talk to Alan, the managing director of the foundation, and Charlie before putting that out.
You're like, I want to smack this boy around.
By the way,
can I beat him? May I beat him, please?
If you ever had a reason to fire me, I'm going to give you one right now. This is what I'm going to do. And so, but it got a pretty positive response, and it literally ignited a fire under a lot of Litecoiners who for the longest time had been asking what happened with that, because they saw the photos or video of Charlie and the guys going down there to El Salvador on a plane, but not much else, right? And so like the question was out there, what happened? Why did nothing happen? And so to be able to answer those questions, I think also popped a very large zit on the Litecoin community that needed to be popped. And I believe they appreciated it. And it helped understand a lot of the stuff that goes on in the background. There's always so many backstories to everything. We really only see the shallow part of it. We're always wandering in the shallow end of the pool, but those pools are much deeper. And it's the part of what I do that really burns me out. Is that all the underhandedness, the greed, all the things that it's not a part of who we are. It's not who I am. And I wish people would be able to have a fairer competition on all levels. Right. So it's just something that happened, and I'm glad I did it. I think at some point, I do believe that Charlie and Alan and the rest are glad that it happened too, because then it's not something that has to be answered anymore. It's not a mystery. It's out there. So, yeah. Yeah,
there's many layers of that, of how bad that situation was, in my opinion. Of course, the one thing is you have friends who you stab in the back, that you require to do things that you need their help, that they stab you in the back, and then they rub dirt in the wound afterwards, and it just keeps going. And also just the position of being put in where you are promising something, you are kind of saying, we're going to do this for our community, and then you have nothing, and you're sort of also being like, I don't know if there was this there was an understanding that Charlie would never say anything bad about this. Now he would never. So now the hot potato is in your court. Now it's like you take all the flack for not delivering on something that's not your fault at all, and you can't say anything about it. You can, but it's like understood that you won't. And there's like, I have to say, like, I've had some friction with the Monero community over the years. That's kind of what they do. They have friction. But I'm also friends with some people in the community as well. And, it's a great project, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The maximalist stuff has been always very, like, I've never liked those people at all since 2017 onward. Because, I've been there since the whole thing. And there's no working with them, at least. And I kind of feel like Litecoiners were super giddy to try to work with them, and they sort of took the free help, but gave nothing. Like, there was no even like, well, what if we work together a little? There was it. Obviously, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't feel like they ever gave anything back.
That would be accurate.
And so that makes it even dirtier, where there's this whole like Bitcoin mythos, and Bitcoin was the first. It did a lot of things that no one had done before. It did a lot of things that a lot of people in crypto since have gone wrong and need to kind of go back and study how Bitcoin did it. There's a lot to be said, and obviously when you have lightning in a bottle, like you didn't need any foundation or marketing department or anything like that for Bitcoin, and like some of that is just time and a place. It just happens. But the whole crypto space for the 13 years I've been around has always held Bitcoin on their shoulders, like the whole way through. And part of it's like, well, we need Bitcoin to succeed, and then we all get in. And since 2017, since the block size wars kind of, then there's been this kind of like everyone has kept on sustaining Bitcoin to new heights. And Bitcoin has now started to urinate on all the pallbearers, on all the slaves holding up the throne. And it's just been, and they haven't gotten the hint that this is a one-way street really for a while. And I kind of feel like, like obviously I've been like that since day one. I've never been like, yeah, but look, let's still get Bitcoin in first. Like, no, I've never been that, and I've taken a lot of heat for that maybe. But I kind of feel like like the Litecoin domino was the first one. Like that was the first, you got like 6-8 people carrying this bloated person on a throne, and then there's just, disrespecting them, and then the one person just lets go and leaves. And now you got now it's like, now who's left carrying them? And I kind of feel like that was something that people should write about in history books in the future, was your nice little moment there. Congratulations, you're in the book. Because I think that that's going to be what people point to, like that point when, just like when the Romanian dictator Ceausescu, his face dropped when he realized, oh, I'm losing power and I'm going to be killed soon. It's like that moment where it's just like, the coalition is over. It's Bitcoin. If Bitcoin only is going to have to stand on its own 2 feet, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. I almost, I think of it like a ruler, or like even a general who says, my troops will follow me into battle no matter what. And then he's like, go get them. And then the troops just stand there like, nah, I think I'm done doing this. And they drop their sword or whatever. It's that kind of a feel to it. I remember the first few years I was in the partnerships thing. Like I would be like, yeah, if you had Litecoin, add Bitcoin too, And then at some point I started realizing I wasn't mentioning that part anymore after a while. And it was just like trying to get Litecoin into more things and not necessarily mentioning Bitcoin anymore. And now I'm to the point where it's like, they're in most things already anyway. They're not asking for anybody else to be included.
Yeah.
Why should I? Right? Yeah. Now, maybe I can turn around and, I've started to, like we talked about offline before we got on here, was like one of the big things that's close to me is trying to help other proof of work chains and, like specifically the script family, but anybody else who has the same type of mindset and fairness to it and whatever else. And I think that's why we're able to click and have conversations like right now, because your guard's down, my guard is down, because we don't feel like we have to have them up. Right. And I think that's the way it should be. So I think it's good. It's healthy. Yeah. So it's not to say in the future, we don't go like, hey, if we're able to get into something, have you guys ever considered, Dogecoin or Dash or Pepe coin or whatever else, anything that we feel like we have some sort of a tie to or an alliance of some kind, or just good back and forth. Because I know earlier on in this year, as I also mentioned to you offline, that there's a few leads that you even gave me that those are starting to mature into potential connections. And you had there was no reason for you to give me those leads if you didn't want to. And I appreciate those. And so what can I do in return for Dash then, and I think that's the best way to go forward.
Yeah. And like, I have to say, this has been like the crypto space. There's a lot of what would on the surface seem to be what the maxis are doing, kind of like staying in their own lane and whatever. Under the surface, I think everyone outside is very for the most part, open to cooperation. And so, like, for example, I'm good friends with Zuko, the Zcash founder. He's a fantastic guy, and I asked him some, big partnership questions, and he was like, well, I never liked Dash at all, but I like you, so I'm going to tell you. And so then all right. So then I just take that, and then one of my talks at the Porcupine Freedom Festival kind of like went overtime, and so during the Q&A team, like the Xano team was there, and they just like asked me all kinds of BD questions, and I just told them exactly what to go for, and I talked with them, and we same thing with the Bitcoin Cash community. They're sometimes a little more prickly to like collaboration, but I have like helped them with things, forwarded on things, get them some attention. Obviously, Litecoin, even like in the height of like I'm battling with the dum-dums of the Monero community, right? And while at the same time I'm talking to Vic about trying to figure out some regulatory issues with Monero in New York in particular, and like saying like, it's like, this is what you're looking at, kind of, and this is what you could help. This is what could help this XYZ. Like, the list goes on about back and forth of like the whole cross crypto connection, how well that thing kind of works at the end of the day. And it's funny, like I can't even say that much. Like, there's a lot of, trash talking in the Monero community, a lot of really people I would not do anything for, but there are a lot of people I would do a lot for, and who have actually done a lot for me. And the only thing I can't say that about is the Bitcoin community right now. There the Bitcoin only community? Because I would say it's kind of everyone else, and then the Bitcoin maxis. And the maxis are the one group of people that I would, again, not to collectivize, because I'm not into collectivization. It's each individual stands for themselves. But every individual, even the nice ones that I know in that community, just aren't really interested in anything collaborative, or they don't know how. Even the nice ones don't really know how. They're just not about that.
They're the friends with the bully, but the bully still dictates what happens. Yeah,
and independent thinking, and it gives me bash on MaxiFest. Why not? It's my channel, right? But like, I kind of feel like every other community has independent thinking, that they take their information from maybe the leaders in the community, but they think for themselves, and this is just like, oh, this is what I know about the world. I know what Charlie and his people talk about, because that's my people, and this is my reality according to them. But other than that, I'm a normal person in this environment. Whereas you have, and there's a little bit of monkey see, monkey do, right? And like a lot of Monero people even are much better in real life, like in online, just, whatever.
Keyboard warrior type stuff.
Yes, I have found the one community seems to be a little, and I would say, I would expand this to like Bitcoin SV as well, of those, the maxi communities, right? Those ones that are like only this, everything else sucks. Have real people that have a little bit of like a knee-jerk programming to them, that just like it kicks in as like it's like a firewall that prevents like good ideas from coming in, where you'll have a reasonable discussion on everything, and once it hits that limit of maxi, well, that's just shitcoining, and like then you can't go any further. It's like it's like they got cattle prodded into like, don't go that far. So yeah, I wonder, it'll be interesting to see that deprogramming happen, because it'll have to happen at some point.
Some point, right? And until then, according to their claim, there are no other options. So there obviously are. And so in my frame of mind, well, why can't those options help each other so that their options can be seen, and the options can be heard, and the options can be used? So as much as now granted, I have a very modest amount of anything, but the fact that I'm only truly invested in only Bitcoin and Litecoin as monetary investments, I'm invested in the space beyond that. And I think there's just as much going on with my efforts and your efforts and everybody else's, that investment is just as important, if not more, than the monetary investment that I put into it. So
absolutely. And like everyone knows, like I don't buy crypto, I earn it, and most of what I've earned over these years has been Dash. There's sponsor of this podcast pays me in Bitcoin Cash. I was paid from Zcash for some podcast series in 2023. Up until, like, this is a very different conversation now than it was a month and a half ago, but up until a month and a half ago, it's like screams destitution, as far as like, this is not a get rich, it's a get slow poor scheme for me, more like that, or it's a get free slow scheme. That's been my kind of perspective, obviously. And from that part, it's like working out, and the pumps be what they may. The fun thing is, like, anyone who looks at one thing's for sure, anyone who looks at a Dash price chart and just sees from like the 2017 era to today, anyone who's still there is either the most delusional bag holder in the world, or they're about something else. And you can kind of say the same, less dramatically, but the same for like a Litecoiner, and also a Bitcoin Casher, and definitely a Zcasher, where you just see, like, you're not in it. You're in it either completely delusional, or you're not in it for the money. And the money's not there, and you're still here. Now, how many Bitcoin maximalists, if the price started going down for more than just a little market shakeout here and there, how many would still be around if they're like, well, we're losing money on this, but I believe in it. I'm going to keep pushing it forward. Something to think about.
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. Because, I mean, if you have a lot of those OG holders supposedly have already sold off or started selling off. Granted, they were probably the quiet ones to begin with, is my guess. But,
there was some whale, like when Zcash got added to near intense and they were doing all that DEX trading, some whale kept on dumping like 50 Bitcoin at a time on there to move into Zcash. And I'm like, who has that much? Like, you never know. So, never say never. So, probably a good time to wrap this whole thing up. We've been rambling for a while, but I checked my watch and it's shill-o'clock. So it's time to shill something. So where would you direct people to follow you and your work, as well as anything else you think people would really like to, or you'd like people to see?
Yeah, so I think the first one would be litecoin.com. I think there's a lot of information on there that people would get into and is good. I would say if you want to look into what MWEB actually is and try and download, those 2 or 3 wallets that I mentioned earlier in the program, Nexus Wallet, Cake Wallet, or Stack Wallet, and just try out moving them from regular address to MWEB address and whatever else. Super easy to do. I would try that, and then I think other than that, obviously we have 2 different handles on X that really kind of put out anything that's related to Litecoin. One is the Litecoin Foundation handle, so at LTC Foundation, and that's going to be the more serious one. And then you have the Litecoin handle, which is very shit poster, schizophrenic, all kinds of off the rails, the fun one, right? It'll still put some good information out there, but it's really just more to interact with the X community at large, and help start getting the name Litecoin in people's heads that maybe not would have been interested other than seeing the shit posts. So
yeah, that makes sense. Well, cool. Well, thanks everyone for watching. This has been great, and hope you guys have a good one.
Yeah, thank you.